The 19th of June, 1944. Airfield Chidori in Iwo Jima. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi got off the transport plane and walked right onto the volcanic ash runway, being surrounded by unbearable heat. This career officer, who was 52 years old, orders signed by Prime Minister Hideki Tojo himself, dinned this 8-square-mile volcanic island to the last man, Kuribayashi said as he looked out over the empty island. He looked out at the vast landscape in front of him. Mount Suribachi was visible to the south, and black sand covered everything. I had a perfect understanding of what this assignment meant. In line with his, when he got the orders, he told his wife Yoshi that it was unlikely that even his ashes would come back. From Iwo Jima, located about 750 miles south of Tokyo, is the island of Iwo Jima. Stood in a key strategic spot between the Japanese and the newly taken American bases in the Marana Islands. Native land. It had 3 airfields that allowed Japanese fighter planes to intercept American B-29s. Super Fortress bombers en route to Japan's cities from the north. What if the Americans, if they captured Iwo Jima, they would get rid of this early warning system and set up bases for P-51s and emergency landing fields for bombers that have been damaged. Bombing missions will be accompanied by Mustang fighters all the way to Tokyo. What neither Kuribayashi nor the about 21,000 soldiers who would eventually guard this island knew. That they were about to fight the deadliest battle in the history of the U.S. Marine Corps. A 36-day. Japan's defensive strategy failed in this battle, which showed both how brave the men who were ordered to give your life for a cause that is already lost. Being given the command of Iwo Jima was both the death penalty and honor code. It was given to Kuribayashi on June 8, 1944. The rare chance to meet with Emperor Hirohito in private on the day before he left. But historians say, some people, like Kumio Kakahashi, have said that Kuribayashi may have been chosen on purpose for what military. The people in charge knew it would be a suicide mission. The general had made strong enemies among ultranationalists, controlling Japan's military policy. As the chief military attaché in the United. From 1928 to 1930, Kuribayashi traveled a lot in the United States, studied at Harvard University, and saw for himself how strong American industry is. The United States is the last country in the world, he wrote to his wife. Japan should fight because it has a lot of great industrial potential. People are active and handy. This was so realistic in a time when Japanese, the military doctrine that stressed spiritual power over material resources had. In the eyes of strict officers, Kuribayashi was a defeatist. Even though he had doubts about Japan's war, Kuribayashi did his job with the usual level of professionalism and creativity. He started, during his inspection of Iwo Jima's defenses, and knew right away that traditional Japanese way of being defensive. The soldiers had been digging on the beach. Standard practice is to dig trenches. Protect yourself at the water's edge, fight every landing, and die bravely on the seashores. Kuribayashi told them to stop this work right away. He had learned American attacks on Tarawa by land and sea, where Japanese beach defenses had been destroyed by naval fire before Marines have ever landed. He had thought about what happened at Saipan, where useless Banzai. Thousands of Japanese lives had been wasted on charges that did not really slow down the American victory. Iwo Jima is going to be not the same. Kuribayashi would use a strategy that would change the world. A deep defense, based on fortified positions deep underground that are meant to withstand the most intense attacks and do the most damage. Deaths over a long period of time. Instead of fighting over the beaches, he would let the Americans land, draw them in, and then destroy them. They did it from ready-made positions that naval gunfire and air attacks could not reach. He told his engineers to start building a complicated underground defense system using the islands, natural caves, and rock from volcanoes. 25% of the whole garrison was sent to digging up things, a huge amount of workers that was criticized right away, from subordinate officers who thought men should be training for battle instead of digging tunnels. His former chief of staff said that the general often said, "Americas, we can't even imagine how productive they are. Japan started a war with our enemy is very strong, so we need to get ready for it." The engineering project that took place over the next few months, it was one of the most complex defensive fortification projects in the Pacific War. Japanese mining engineers were sent to plan the underground network and make plans for tunnels at different heights to make sure there is enough airflow and to lessen the damage from explosions near entrances. As of February 1945, Japanese engineers had dug about 18 kilometers of tunnel, putting together defensive positions that go around the whole island. Soldiers whose job it was to work in tunnels did. In temperatures between 30 degrees Celsius and 50 degrees Celsius, because the volcanic rock gave off a lot of heat that turned tunnels into ovens that were too hot to breathe in. Men often passed out from being too hot. Water was still very hard to come by, and supplies were limited to what submarines and surface ships could bring, putting American submarines through their paces. The slope of Mount Suribachi in the north. By itself, there were several thousand yards of tunnels. The main command bunker is situated in the northern highlands, close to the village of Ka. It was 20 meters below ground and had several chambers that were all connected to each other by 150 m of passageways, which is where Kuribayashi set up his war room. At this late point in the war, the garrison protecting Ioma was made up of different types of Japanese soldiers. The 109th Division was part of the fighting force, about 13,000 army soldiers. The troops were split into two separate mixed brigades. The second separate, the mixed brigade led by Major General Kato Osuga, had about 5,000 men. Colonel Masao Ikeda was in charge of the 145th Infantry Regiment. 2,700 soldiers were sent. There were about 7,500 men in the naval forces from the 27th Air Flotilla, which is led by Rear Admiral Toshinosuke Ikamaru. Unlike veteran groups that had fought in China or the early Pacific campaigns, many of the defenders were new to the fight, soldiers who didn't get much training. Some were reserve soldiers in their middle years who were called up as Japan was nearing the end of its war. Reserves of workers. Others were support troops and office workers who were thrown into combat as the Empire's situation in terms of strategy got worse. One of the most well-known officers was the 26th Tank Regiment, is led by Colonel Baron Takechi Nishi. Born into the 12th of July, 1902, Nishi won a gold medal in show jumping at the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles, becoming famous in Hollywood, and getting to know actors like Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and Charlie Chaplin. His wife later said that he had been sad after Pearl Harbor because he knew that war with the United States was coming. Strategic craziness, but a sense of duty. During the week of July 18, 1944, from Busan, South Korea, to Uoma, the ship carrying Nishi's regiment was hit by a torpedo from the USS Kobe. All 28 of the squadron's tanks went down to the Pacific Ocean. Nishi went back to Tokyo to look for replacements and was able to get 22 tanks. During this short trip back home, he made one last trip to see his beloved. Uranus, his horse, helped him win the Olympics. Until the end of 1944, defensive. Even though American planes and submarines were constantly bothering them, preparations got stronger. The defenders found that mixing Uoima's black volcanic ash with cement made better concrete. Pillboxes were built with walls of reinforced concrete that were 4 feet thick and could take direct hits from naval shells. About 300 anti-aircraft guns were put in by the Japanese, 33 naval guns between 4.7 and 6 inches for 138. Artillery, 69 anti-tank guns, and Nishi's 22 tanks, which were buried. They were put in fixed positions and buried up to their turrets to make them safe places for artillery batteries. Powered by gasoline, radios and lights could work underground thanks to generators. There are hundreds of hidden gun and mortar posts were put all over the island. Because the Japanese were getting ready for defense, every part of Iwo became a possible killing zone, defenseless against fire from a number of hidden positions. Kuribayashi's backup philosophy was very different from what the Japanese military had always done. Clearly, he didn't allow Banzai charges. During the Pacific War, Japan's defensive strategy was based on mass frontal attacks, with soldiers launching suicide attacks that met cultural expectations of a good death but didn't do anything militarily useful. Kuribayashi said that charging at American guns was like killing yourself for no reason. It was instead every Japanese soldier. Ioma was told to kill at least 10 Americans before she died. A victory was not the goal. The goal was to kill as many people as possible. This strategy caused big disagreements among the officers. Hi, Vice Admiral. Sadaiki Matsunaga and Kuribayashi had a public argument about how to defend themselves. They wanted to set up strong positions along the beaches and directly fight the American landing. Matsunaga was removed from command by Kuribayashi, who then put in Rear Admiral Ikamaru, who was more willing to work with the Army's defensive plans. In December 1944, Kuribayashi set up. The goal date for finishing defensive preparations was set for February 11, 1945. Even though American submarines and planes were bothering them, more people kept coming through. January. There were between 21,000 and 23,000 men in the final garrison. But the level of supply remained woefully inadequate. It was only 60% of what military doctrine said the defenders had in ammunition, thought to be necessary for an engagement at the division level. The amount of food was calculated to last for no more than 3 months. Fresh water was still very hard to come by. About 1,500 people, Japanese soldiers, died when American submarines sank their transport ships on their way to the island. Before the invasion, life on Iwo was hard because there wasn't enough food or water and people were always working. Stress. Soldiers lived in tunnels and caves and slept on lava rock. The air was tainted with sulfur. The island got its name from the gases that came from the volcano and filled the air. There were not any trees and nothing but scrub grass for plants. The heat never stopped. Men got stronger. Heat rash, disagreements, and a number of tropical diseases. There weren't many medical supplies. Not enough food and dirty. A lot of soldiers died of sickness before American forces arrived because of the terrible conditions. Still, Kuribayashi refused to give his men special treatment and insisted on going through the same hard times as them. Former subordinates say that General Kuribayashi often went to see wounded enlisted men in the hospital. This is almost never what an officer of the general staff does. When the amount of water available was cut, Kuribayashi agreed to the same limited allocation as the private with the lowest ranking. Letters from Kuribayashi to his family during this time showed a thoughtful man who cared about his family, loved them, and was okay with dying. Necessary giving up. In November, he wrote to his wife Yoshi, 1944, "You shouldn't think I'll make it. The enemy could land on this island soon. They do, and we need to keep an eye on what happens with those on ATU and Saipan. And men are very good at death. I'm sorry to end my life here fighting the United States of America, but I want to protect this island for as long as I can and keep the enemy out of the air. Dear Tokyo, take care of your health and live a long time. Our children will thank us. It won't be easy either. Please take care of them after I die." Kuribashi's words showed that he had no illusions about what would happen to him or how the battle would end. Starting in June 15, 1944, American bombers B-24 and B-25 attacked the island for 74 days in a row, which was the longest period of bombardment before the invasion of the Pacific War. These attacks destroyed airfields and buildings on the ground, but they didn't do much else. Effectiveness against defenses built underground. American intelligence assessments were much less accurate than both defense plans and the strength of the garrison. Photographs taken from above showed destroyed airfields and holes in them. Buildings, which led planners to believe that months of bombing had made the Japanese much less useful. According to intelligence reports, the garrison had only about 13,000 to 15,000 soldiers, which was a lot less than the actual number. Strength. More importantly, aerial photos couldn't go deep enough into the ground to show the extensive group of tunnels. The war began on February 16, 1945. Of the last attack phase, battleships, cruisers, and fast attack ships were the first to attack before the invasion. Destruction ships fired devastating weapons. Harry Schmidt, Major General of the Marine Corps, asked for 10 days of heavy bombing, but they only got 3. Days were hampered by bad weather. The defenders from Japan took cover in their tunnels to wait out the steel storm. A group of 12 LCI gunboats moved on February 17th, close to the shore to help demolition teams working underwater. The Japanese came out from where they were and started firing with everything they had. The gunboats were destroyed. LCI 449 sank and several others were damaged. Others were badly damaged, and a total of 170 people were killed. This was the sacrifice showed many hidden Japanese positions, which let the battleships Tennessee and Idaho get to them. To get within 2,500 yards of shore on February 18th to crush certain devastating accuracy at their targets. When you are inside the tunnels, feel that the bombardment tested the defenders' mental and physical strength. The mountain itself looked like to shake with every hit. Dust and other things kept falling from the ceilings of the tunnels. Men sat still, prayed, or they wrote last letters to families they would never see again. About 22,000 Americans were killed. Fired shells at Iwo Jima during the bombardment before the invasion. Each one is a reminder of how powerful big businesses are against them. Still, Kuribayashi's plan to defend himself worked. Underground positions were still there, mostly whole. At 8:59 a.m. on February 19, 1945, the bases were hit by the first group of Marines from the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions. The tractors that can go on land and water. It looked like there was no end. Wave after wave coming closer to the shore. Offshore, the help fleet went all the way to the horizon. Hundreds of ships made up a show of naval power that was stronger than anything that the defenders had ever seen. Landing craft had a hard time with the rough surf and beaches with steep sides. Marines jumped off tractors and went ankle-deep right away into loose volcanic sand and had a hard time moving inland. An ash from a volcano was soft and loose, which makes vehicles float and lose their grip. The Kuribayashis. The orders were clear. Allow them to land. Let them crowd the shores. Then start shooting. With everything. Marines moved forward with surprisingly little speed for almost 30 minutes. Fight back. Then Kuribayashi told them what to do. Each and every piece of artillery, mortar, all of the machine guns fired at the same time. It became dangerous to be on the beaches. Marines jumped for cover that wasn't there. Japanese artillery was already signed up. On every part of the beach, shots were fired with devastating accuracy. Gunfire from a machine gun swept up areas that led to the terrace and marked the beach's edge. About 30,000 Marines had landed by the end of the day, making a beachhead that went across the whole southern end of the island. They had blocked off Mount Suribachi because of the rest of the island's defenses, but it had cost a lot. Over. On the first day alone, 500 Marines were killed and more than 1,800 were hurt. On the first night, Marines got ready for the huge Banzai charges that had been common in previous Pacific battles. But those attacks were forbidden by Kuribayashi's orders. The night went by with only. Marines were confused but thankful after the small probing attacks. On February 20th, the real fight for Mount Suribachi began. The 28th Marine Regiment began the slow and cruel process of weakening Japan's defenses. Marines moved forward yard by yard, clearing bunkers with flamethrowers, grenades to kill defenders and pillboxes, and explosives to destroy tunnel entrances. Japan fought from positions that had been planned ahead of time. When positions became unsafe, they retreated through connecting tunnels. Unacceptable, coming back to fight from different angles. I am Colonel Kanehiko Atsuchi, being in charge of the Mount Suribachi garrison of about 1,800 men. The defense was strong and skilled. By February 23rd, after days of non-stop fighting, a Marine patrol made it to the top of Suribachi. They raised a small American flag at 10:20, which made Marines cheer. All the way across the beach. A second patrol later that day brought a bigger flag too. Changed the first one. This was taken by Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal. As the second flag was raised, it became one of the most famous scenes in World War II. But for the Japanese defenders, for those who were still in the tunnels under the mountain, the flag meant that the battle would go on below ground. There were still small groups of soldiers fighting in the Suribachi tunnel complex for weeks after the surface of the mountains had been declared safe. Japan's main defensive positions were in the northern part of. Kuribayashi had put most of his strength on an island with terrain that helped the defender. The north. The highlands had broken ground, ravines, rocky ridges, and a huge number of. The caves were turned into a planned killing zone with defensive positions that helped each other out. The Marines gave. The names of the northern strong points show how horrible it was to fight there. Turkey Knob on the Meat Grinder, Hill 382, Bloody Gorge and Amphitheater. Each one showed a group of fortified. There were positions that had to be taken down by direct attack. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions attacked these positions at the same time, moving slowly against strong resistance from fanatics. The American forces first saw how scary Kuribayashi's defenses were when they were fighting in northern Ioma. Japanese positions that looked like they were destroyed would reopen for fire hours later when defenders came out. From the tunnels to the bunkers again, Marines came up with their own unique strategies. For tunnel warfare, flamethrowers are used to clear out rooms that are connected, and explosives are used to collapse parts of tunnels. Flamethrower teams became necessary, even though they were killing almost 92% of their opponents. Marine tank battalions found that their M4A3R3 flame tanks were always in demand. At the end of the battle, the 5th Marine Division's flame tanks had used up between 5,000 and 10,000 gallons of napalm every day. As March turned into February, Japan's defensive position became more and more desperate. Every day, more people died. Food supplies ran out too. Starvation food. Because there wasn't enough water, men got very sick, being thirsty even while fighting. There were no more medical supplies left to suffer after being hurt, without even basic pain relief. Stocks of ammunition were almost empty for a few types. Still, the defense went on. The plan that Kuribayashi of this was working, maximum attrition. The number of American deaths had already surpassed all estimates made before the invasion. The 5-day battle had gone on for 3 weeks, and there was no sign of an end in sight. Barren. Even though some of Nishi's tanks were damaged or unable to move, his tank regiment fought as infantry from positions they had set up in the highlands in the north. The Americans knew that Nishi was on the island. Officers of intelligence sent out tries to get him to give up by saying that the world would be sad to lose such a famous person. Nishi never. They replied. He stayed with his men through the hard times and kept up their discipline and morale even as the situation lost all hope. On or around March 22, 1945, Nishi was killed in battle. The specifics of what happened are still unknown. His body was never found among the northern highlands' thousands of dead Japanese. Some accounts say he killed himself in a ritual way. Others say he died while leading troops in battle. Nishi was faked being promoted to colonel and given the 3rd-class Order of the Rising Sun Medal with a neck ribbon. By the middle of March, American advances had squished the last few Japanese troops into an area smaller than a square mile. A mile from the island's northernmost point. Kuribayashi's command structure and lines of communication stayed the same, working by way of the tunnel network. The general sent his last message to the imperial household in Tokyo. It's almost time for the battle to end. Right now, I'm in charge of about 400 people. Tanks have come into our last defense line in different areas. They are now going after our last stronghold. We will not give up. I really am sorry that we weren't able to defend the island better. The fight is still going on. The message from March 16th was even more powerful. I'm sorry, because I can picture the terrible things that happened in our empire. But I feel a little better when I see when officers and men die after fighting this inch-by-inch battle against an overwhelming enemy with many being surrounded by tanks and unimaginable bombs. The Americans said Iwo Jima was safe on March 26, 1945, 36 days after the invasion started. But fighting didn't stop for weeks after that. Soldiers from Japan and sealed the cave systems kept fighting back, and people came out at night to look for food and water. The Americans consistently. They used explosives to block off tunnel entrances, pumped seawater into cave systems, and grenades and flamethrowers to get rid of positions underground. The last organized fight ended with. It is thought that Kuribayashi died on March 26 when he led the last attack on American positions. On March 25, 1945, 300 of Kuribayashi's men put on their last Banzai attack on the order that the general had used to plan his whole defense. The body of Kuribayashi was never been found or named. During this last battle, Rear Admiral Ikamaru also died. At all, both countries were shocked by the number of deaths. American troops were hurt. 26,038 people were killed, including about 6,821 deaths. There were 5,931 deaths in the Marines. Killed in action died of wounds, or went missing in action and was thought to be dead. There were more Marines killed than died in all of World War I. 29 more people died while serving as Navy corpsman or surgeon on the Marines. A total of 19,217 Marines were hurt. This stood for the only major battle in the Pacific where more Americans died than Japanese, though Japanese combat deaths were 3 times as many in the U.S. It cost Japan even more. Totally terrible. Out of about 21,000 defenders, only 1,083 made it through the battle. Only 216 were captured during the fighting, with the rest came out of caves and tunnels in the following weeks and months. 2. Soldiers from Japan stayed hidden until January 6, 1949, almost 4 years after the battle ended, finally giving up after years of living in the tunnels. It was the strategic value of Iwo Jima that led to the terrible cost, though this was still debated. By the end of the war, 2,251 B-29 bombers landed on the island in an emergency, saving about 24,761 lives. People in the air who would have had to ditch in the Pacific or crash while trying to get to the Marianas. When there was an emergency, dynamite was the first B-29 to land. On March 4, 1945, while the Northern Highlands were still in the Middle East. P-51. Based on Iwo Jima, Mustang fighters started going with bombing raids to Tokyo and other American cities in Japan. The island was used as a base for air-sea rescue operations, which speeds up the response time for air crews that have been shot down. 27 people died in the Battle of Iwo Jima. 13 Medals of Honor were given posthumously, which is more than in any other battle in Marine Corps history. In his thoughts on the battle, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz said, "Among the Americans who served on EW Island, uncommon bravery was a common trait. The battle showed that the Japanese army could kill a lot of people. Even when the Americans were clearly better than them, Kuribayashi's strategies showed that attackers could pay a terrible price if defenders were ready and determined. Military planners planned that an invasion of the Japanese home islands would kill hundreds of thousands of Americans if the Japanese used similar defensive strategies, but they were bigger. These predictions helped make the decision that they would rather use atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki than start Operation Downfall. The planned attack. Japan. Families of Japanese men who died on Iwo Jima remember the battle as the aftermath only brought sadness and no resolution. Most of the bodies were never found or identified. Families got word that someone had died in battle, but there were no bodies to bury or graves to visit. Not being able to properly. In Japanese culture, where Buddhism stressed honoring the dead, this was especially important. How important a proper burial is. Japanese are still angry decades after the war. The bodies were still being found in Iwo Jima's caves by search teams. More than 10,000 Japanese soldiers' bodies were found, still rest on the ground of the island. In the years right after the war, the Battle of in Japan, Iwo Jima was mostly forgotten. The country was filled with rebuilding after a total loss and dealing with the horror of the atomic bombings and firebombings that killed hundreds of thousands of regular people. About 900,000 Japanese people were killed in the strategic bombing campaign. Civilians. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed by atomic bombs, which killed around 200,000 people. In this case, Iwo Jima was just one more disaster in a year with a record number of national disasters. After many years, historians and filmmakers started to really look at the battle from the point of view of the defender. In 1970, Yoshi Kuribayashi stood for American veterans and Japanese families of war dead at a lunch in Tokyo. In a speech, she thanked them for their friendship words and got a standing ovation. She later went to the island was the site of both the 1985 and 1995 reunions of honor. The reunion in 1985 honor brought together old men who used to be enemies. Years of peace made them less angry than they were during the war. They walked the battlefields together, going back to spots where they had tried to kill each other. Veterans from Japan showed Americans, Marines the tunnel systems they had looked out for. American veterans talked about how they were able to lower these defenses. There were tears, hugs, and shared stories at the meetings, saying prayers for the dead. Veterans talked about how reconciliation could help bring about peace. Every 5 years, similar reunions kept happening, which helped former enemies get along again. The island itself hasn't changed much since 1945 and has been kept in its battle-card state. These days, it is called Owodo in Japanese instead. Access for civilians is severely limited, allowed only for memorial services where veterans and families of the dead could attend. Japan's defense for the seas. Force is in charge of a small naval air facility. The United States Navy sometimes uses the airfield for as. Uoma is still mostly a memorial to the dead, but it is also used for carrier landing practice, where American and Japanese monuments stand, and where thousands of Japanese soldiers are still buried in caves that can't be opened. Next to each other, historians today who study the battle can look at sources from both sides, have mostly come to the same conclusions. In terms of tactics, the battle showed how well defense in depth works when it's done right. Kuribayashi's plan caused the most damage, killings, and making the battle last much longer than the Americans thought it would, changing what military planners had planned. What was supposed to take 5 days turned into a 36-day ordeal. The island's value as a fighter base and emergency landing field made it worth capturing, though this is still up for debate. Continues to see if the cost was fair compared to the benefit. The battle showed how strong American industry was. Japanese tactical skill, engineering prowess, and the ability to handle logistics while showing off. The defendants fighting from ready positions show a lot of determination. Uoma's cultural memory is not the same. There is trade between the U.S. and Japan. It is an important battle in American history. Status, as shown by Rosenthal's picture in the Arlington, Virginia, Marine Corps War Memorial. Every Marines learn about Uoma while they are in school. In Japan, not many people knew about it until 2006, when Clint Eastwood's the movie Letters from Iwo Jima brought the defenders' point of view to people's attention again. The Japanese-language movie with Japanese actors tried to show the battle from the point of view of the Japanese. The movie was based on letters written by General Kuribayashi and the book So Sad to Fall In. Battle written by Kumiko Kakahashi. Military doctrine was changed by new tactics that were created during the Battle of Iwo Jima. For many years, it became common to use combined arms tactics. How important? It was known that special weapons could be used to weaken defenses. Techniques for tunnel warfare would be used in later wars, especially in Vietnam, where the Viet Cong used similar underground systems for defense. The battle showed that even with a lot of firepower and a lot of people, even if the army was stronger, infantry still had to attack the enemy in fortified positions and kill them. The letters that General Kuribayashi sent from Iwo Jima show us a lot about how he felt as the Americans invaded Japan. Reached out. Through his letters to his wife Yoshi and children, we saw a man who loved his family very much, knew he was going to die, and hoped they would be safe because of what he did. In one letter, he wrote about the ideas that kept him going. If our one more day of safety for kids, it would be worth it to protect this island for one more day. Japanese defenders held on to this belief through the hell of battle. Whether the battle really did keep the country safe for any meaningful amount of time is still up for debate. There is no doubt about the sincerity of the belief and the resolve it gave them. The Battle of Iwo Jima is one of the most important events in history, getting into violent fights. A 36-day battle in which about 27,000 men died or were hurt very badly on an 8-square-mile island. It showed how terrible war is and how brave people have to be. People who are stuck in situations they can't change, and the chance for reconciliation even after wars with the most violence. The general, Baron Nishi, and the rear Admiral Ikamaru fought with thousands of Japanese soldiers whose names have never been written down. Very brave for a cause that was already lost. They were forced to follow orders and died for their country. That wouldn't be saved by their sacrifice in the end, but by Japan's unconditional surrender 4 months later. An honor to all who fought there is the island itself. Its volcanic rock will always be linked to one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. The tunnels that used to hide desperate defenders now only hold memories. The bodies of people who never left. The beaches where Marines had a hard time through volcanic sand are now quiet, with only occasional veterans or researchers are there to pay their respects. Major General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. He died with honor, bravery, and a strong sense of duty, just like he had lived. His body was never found, but his letters to his family and the respect that American Marines showed him during the war are still around today, due to his defensive genius and the way he led as a commander who shared every hard time with his men. Baron Nishi, who won the Olympics. He was famous in Hollywood and died fighting Americans he used to call friends. This shows how tragic war is. Turns friends against each other. The 21,000 Japanese soldiers who fought back. Most of Uema's people died in the underwater tunnels and caves on the island. Incredibly brave for a home they would never see again.